tightly with fabric and soaked in fuel. Next, it's put into a metal sheath with a flint. And as the blade is drawn out, the flint is struck by hand, producing sparks that light the fuel instantly. Now, the fabric doesn't burn away, only the fuel does. So as the sword swings through the air, the fuel whips around with it, leaving streaks of flame behind. To put it out, the burning blade is slid back into the sheath, cutting off oxygen. The blade is wrapped tightly with fabric and soaked in fuel. When they removed the feeding tube from the mosquito, it was hollow and straight, but it was too fragile to use directly. So they coated it with resin to make it stronger and attached it to a needle tip. Then they built a 3D printer around it, and as ink flowed through the tube, it printed lines finer than a grain of sand, letting them build tiny structures most printers could never make, all thanks to a mosquito. When they drop down onto your hands and feet before leaning forward and running like an animal. Since you have 4 points hitting the ground instead of just 2, there are more chances to push off and build speed. Because running fast isn't just about moving your legs quickly, it's about how hard you push while touching the ground. So if you time it just right, your arms and legs could add more force with every step, allowing you to run faster. Drop down. If you stick a metal rod into the ground and run electricity through it, the current would move through the wet soil before zapping a worm. And this forces them to escape by wriggling to the surface. Now, if you had 500 trillion of these devices, you could cover the surface of the Earth. And with 130 million nuclear power plants, you could send enough electricity into the ground to pull up every single earthworm, covering the world in a layer of wriggling pink worms. Thin holes are drilled into the gold bar before tungsten rods are pushed inside. And after the surface is patched back up, it looks and weighs just like any other gold bar. You see, tungsten weighs almost the exact same as gold, so counterfeiters use these to trick customers. But if the bar is passed through an ultrasound check, the waves hit the tungsten differently, revealing the scam. Thin holes are drilled into the... When you spray a German cockroach with poison, a special enzyme inside its body breaks down the chemicals before they can damage the roach's nerves, meaning the poison doesn't work. And if that roach lays eggs, many of their babies will inherit the same protection. Within months, those babies will have more babies, and eventually, most of the colony is safe from the poison. Now, a whole new group can survive the same poison and even stronger chemicals until you're left with roaches that nothing can kill except a stomp. When you spray a German... If you plucked one single hair off Robert's head, he would look exactly the same. Now imagine you pluck another, and another, and soon you've taken dozens, maybe even 100. But Robert still looks normal. Now, his hair might be slightly thinner, but no one would say he's bald. So you keep going. Hundreds turn into thousands. Now Robert's scalp is starting to peek through. People might say he's thinning, but he still wouldn't quite be bald. So what if you keep plucking until only 1,000 hairs remain? Well, at some point he starts to be bald. But where exactly is that point? Some people say it's 0 hairs, which is indeed bald, but if you add one single hair, he's still bald. Even 10 hairs wouldn't make a difference. So where is the line? At what exact number of hairs does Robert stop being bald? If you plucked one single hair, he would slide the arrow into the tube, then hide it in his sleeve. Inside the tube sat a compressed spring, held back by a small trigger. And when he flicked his wrist, they kidnapped the musician, according to the story. And when they arrived, he realized he was at the headquarters of a mafia boss who happened to love his music. So he was forced to play piano for the mobster's birthday. But according to him, he was showered with money and poured glass after glass of expensive champagne. After 3 days of performing, he was let go with his pockets stuffed full of cash and a great story. They kidnapped the musician, according to the story, and wrap the cable around Mount Fuji's base before the massive motors pull it tight, which will separate billions of tons of rock from the bedrock below. Then drill thousands of deep shafts, driving giant steel anchors deep into the rock, and pump grout to lock them into the mountain's core before wrapping the outside with steel mesh and massive bands. Then use a ring of rockets and cables to lift the entire thing and turn it in the air by adjusting the cable lengths. Once it's flipped, carve a giant hole in the bottom and attach a frictionless bearing inside before threading a cord into the hole and locking it into the shaft. Then connect the cord to thousands of fighter jets that will pull it to make the mountain spin. Wrap the cable around Mount Fuji's base before they glued the dead snail to a museum card before putting it on display. And it stayed in the same spot for years before they noticed that the card had become discolored. And when they removed it, they found a film over the shell's opening. So they placed it in warm water and slowly the film softened and the snail pushed its head out, still alive. It had survived by shutting its body down for 4 years until conditions were safe again. They glued the dead snail to a museum card before putting it on display. They pried the mirror off of the shower wall because they kept hearing a strange ringing sound, and they were shocked to find a hidden camera inside. They followed the cable through the house until they discovered a hard drive hidden in a closet, and suddenly realized their landlord had been watching them. But when police checked the drive, they found no files. Now this could mean it was streaming in real time, leaving no trace. But since there were no recordings, no one was charged. And the house mysteriously burnt down 2 weeks later, almost killing their teenage son. When the father went back to look through the rubble, he cut his leg, and it got so infected that he had to have it amputated, meaning the family lost a leg, their home, and their privacy, while the landlord got away scot-free. They pried the mirror off. If you play a game of chess, every move you make creates a unique path from start to finish. Now, your friend plays a separate game, and even if it looks similar, one different move makes it a completely different game. And if everyone on Earth started playing billions of full games, each one has its own exact sequence of moves. Then, if they all play again and again for their entire lives, you would get trillions of games, and almost none of them would repeat. This is because every move opens new choices, and those choices branch into even more, until the total number of possible games becomes so massive that even if every atom in the observable universe played one unique game per second since the Big Bang, they still wouldn't come close to playing them all. If you play a game of chess, every move you make He was pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt, and officers gave him a test to see if he had been drinking, but they had to run the test again. The man refused and walked toward the back of his van, saying that he was going to kill them. He yanked open the van doors, releasing his full hive of honeybees that he kept in the back. The swarm exploded into the air, stinging officers as they sprinted for cover. Backup finally arrived and arrested the man, but he paid bail and was released just hours later. He was pulled over for...
Here's why hackers don't want you using a VPN.
Under this carnival ride, he started painting walls as a teen, and his art spread across the city. People recognized it everywhere, making him a legend. But he got sick with a disease that paralyzed his body, and for 7 years, he could only move his eyes. So a team of programmers built him a pair of glasses with a camera. It tracked his eyes and moved a cursor on the screen. He would stare at a color to select it before moving the cursor to draw lines, as the device turned them into brushstrokes. The team projected the art onto buildings across the world, and from his hospital bed, he could paint again. He started painting walls as a teen, and his art The pilot would pull the ejection handle, igniting a small rocket under his seat. This would cause his body to be slammed with over 1,000 pounds of force, all in less than a second. And this would squish his spine downwards, packing it so tightly that in some cases, his spine wouldn't be able to stretch back, which could leave him a little shorter than he was before. The pilot would pull the ejection handle, igniting a small rocket. The plastic cups are placed next to each eye, covering its side view, while a fuzzy tube is. Interlock your fingers tightly and fold them down. Then press the back edge of your palms together. Next, he checked. Interlock your fingers tightly and fold them down. Then press the back edge of your palms together. Next, offset the bottom of your hand so the gaps are sealed tight. And press your thumbs together, leaving a small hole between them. Fold them down, then purse your lips and press your top lip on the knuckles of your thumb. Breathe out like a heavy sigh, directing the air down into your hand before it comes back out the same hole. If it doesn't work the first time, adjust your fingers, the angle of your mouth, and the speed of your breath until you hear a bird whistling from your hands. Interlock your fingers tightly and fold them. He checked into the hotel, but he didn't have any luggage. And once he was inside, he kept all the lights turned off. As the days passed, loud voices could be heard from his door. And soon enough, he was found tied up and stabbed inside his room. He was rushed to the hospital where he passed away. Later, an anonymous caller paid for his funeral, where they sent exactly 13 roses. Police later discovered he had been using a fake name, but with no clear suspect, his murder is still unsolved to this day. He checked into the hotel, but he didn't have any luggage. And once they drilled a hole into a plastic tube after breaking into the grocery store. You see, that tube was used to move cash into a locked vault. So they pushed a vacuum cleaner through the opening and sucked the money out. For years, the men robbed 15 stores this way, stealing over $800,000 in cash. They were finally caught on camera, but were never identified. They drilled a hole. If you pick a 3-digit number like 861, where the first and last numbers have at least a difference of 2, and then flip it backwards and subtract the smaller number from the bigger one, flip that answer and add these two numbers together, you'll get 1089 every time you use this pattern. You see, if you break the number apart, the middle digits match and cancel out when you subtract. This leaves you with the first number minus the last multiplied by 99. But if you look at the multiples of 99 between 2 and 9, they all have a matching pair that's flipped, giving you the same answer of 1089 every time. He used her fingerprints to open her phone and peeled back her eyelids using her face to unlock her bank account. You see, he was deep in debt from gambling, and when his ex-girlfriend got sick, he mixed cold medicine into her food, making her fall into a deep sleep. He sent himself over $20,000, which he used to pay off his debt, before running away to gamble even more. But when she woke up, she had several alerts from her bank, so she called the police and the man was eventually arrested. He used her fingerprint. If you get buried by an avalanche, the snow will compress you on all sides, making it hard to tell which way is up. So if you try to dig your way out, you could end up going the wrong way and suffocate to death. Instead, some people say to cover your face and make an air pocket. Then start drooling. Whichever way the drool falls is down, so you should dig the opposite way. If you get buried by an avalanche, the snow will compress you on all sides, making it hard to tell which way is up. So if you try to dig your way out, you could end up going the wrong way and suffocate to death. Instead, some people say to cover your face and make an air pocket. Then start drooling. Whichever way the drool falls is down, so you should dig the opposite way. If you get buried, he pulled the bearings out of a skateboard and wrapped an old. If you were shrunk down and dropped in as Pac-Man, you would have to sprint through the maze at about 12 miles per hour to escape the ghosts. But every time you eat a dot, you would slow down for a split second, letting the ghost creep closer behind you. You would also have to reduce your speed to make turns, while ghosts can turn almost instantly. And as you move through higher boards, you would have to increase your speed to 15 miles per hour, meaning one slow turn and one dot at the wrong time, the gap disappears and the ghosts will catch you. He built a wooden frame in the shape of a Lamborghini, then used a turning wheel to shape pieces of aluminum to the body. Next, he welded the chassis, and over the course of 7 long way and suffocate to death. Instead, some people say to cover your face and make an air pocket. Then start drooling. Whichever way the drool falls is down, so you should dig the opposite way. If you took every single block from He built a wooden frame in the shape of a Lamborghini, then used a turning wheel to shape pieces of aluminum to the body. Next, he welded the chassis, and over the course of 17 years, he put all the pieces together, adding an engine, seats, wheels, and lights. But since he had used his basement as a workshop, he couldn't get the car out. So he got a backhoe to dig a hole down to his basement. Then he created a ramp before knocking down the wall and pulling his dream car out on a sled. He built a wooden frame in the shape. If you took every single block from the Great Pyramid and stacked them into one giant tower, that tower would be nearly 2,000 Burj Khalifas tall, blowing way past the International Space Station straight into space. But if we took all those blocks and flattened them into one giant walkout, it would take the king of boxing, Alexander Usyk, over 20 straight days of walking to make his fight with the king of kickboxing, Rico Verhoeven, at the pyramids of Giza. Two champions of different fighting styles facing off at the most iconic place on Earth. And you can watch this epic event on Saturday, May 23rd, exclusively on DAZN. If you took every single place a domino on the ground, then make the next one 30% bigger. And if you keep increasing their size, the 20th domino would be taller than a house, and the 45th would be higher than Mount Everest. Now, when you tip over the first one, each domino has just enough energy to knock over the next. But the 74th domino would weigh more than the Earth. And at that scale, the domino would have such strong gravity that they would start pulling the Earth and each other toward a shared center of mass. Place a domino. If someone tripped and fell off of the building, and you threw out a sticky hand to try and save him, it obviously wouldn't do anything. But if you made the entire arm over 60 feet long, with a palm big enough to wrap around his chest, and around 20 people holding the end, and you had it painted with a special glue that could hold over 2,000 pounds, after the hand slapped onto his body, it would dry in just a few seconds, before stretching another 30 feet to break his fall safely. But if the hand touches his bare skin, it might just tear a chunk off instead. He adopted the baboon as a pet, take a He dropped his hammer while working in the field, so his friend grabbed a metal detector and they started looking. The device suddenly started beeping and they thought they had found the hammer, so they dug into the ground, but ended up uncovering silver spoons, then gold jewelry and ancient coins. He called the police, and the next day, archaeologists rushed in, finding over 14,000 Roman coins, along with pounds of jewelry and tableware that had been buried in the field for about 1,600 years. The two ended up sharing the loot that was worth millions. He dropped his hammer while working. If you clip their nail too far, the blade slices into a bundle of. They built a giant metal wheel and stuck. They poured the bullets into the pot before covering them with water.
Valet.
They poured the bullets into the pot before covering them with water and boiling them for hours. You see, the soldiers hoped this would damage the material inside while keeping the outer shell the same. This way, they could trade the ammunition for food. And if the ammo was sold to their enemies, the damaged bullets wouldn't fire correctly, which would jam their guns. But modern bullets can actually handle a ton of heat, so even after boiling them, they still fired perfectly. They poured.
Valet, please. Right here.
They built a giant metal wheel and stuck in it. When you drop the puck, air rushes up from thousands of tiny holes, lifting it and letting it fly across the surface. You see, the table was loosely based on ice hockey, but while pucks glide on ice, they barely move on other surfaces. To solve this, a powerful fan is hidden underneath the table, pumping air in to create a thin cushion underneath the pucks, letting the puck sail smoothly across the surface just like ice. While he was studying, a hand reached through the window and dropped a velvet case onto his desk. Inside were two glowing contact lenses. He slid one onto each eye, and immediately the text on the page moved. Diagrams animated, labels slid in place, and the answers appeared right on the paper. Every problem was solved before he even finished reading it. On the way out of the library, he saw the man who gave him the lenses watching in the distance. During labs, the lines he needed to cut appeared as paths, and when taking a test, every question lit up with answers only he could see. He graduated at the top of his class and saw the mysterious man again in the crowd. Years passed by, and he became a legend in the industry. While operating, overlays hovered over organs, showing him exactly what to do. And every single one of his patients survived. After years of this, the call came. The president had suffered a stroke live on air. Emergency surgery was needed, and he was their best bet. His hands were shaking as he scrubbed in, but as he stood over the president, the lenses immediately brightened, drawing neat paths across the failing heart. He began to push the scalpel into the skin, but then everything disappeared. There was nothing to guide his hands. Shaking, he pushed the scalpel anyway and cut too deep. Blood spurted up over his arms, and it was too late. Monitors were flatlining. The president was dead. The crowd was horrified as they looked down at the body, except for one man. He was completely unfazed, with a faint smile on his face as he turned and walked away. While he was studying, a hand reached through the window and dropped. You should look for a river if you get lost. Press the wood against a curved wall. The floorboard snapped under his feet at the abandoned building, and he fell straight down a sewer pipe. They built a giant metal frame and covered it. The blind man climbs the tree. When someone dies in the house, the beekeeper will gently knock on the hive, according to tradition. Then they'll whisper the dead person's name inside. Some even place a black cloth over the hive, while others turn it towards the funeral procession. Now, at weddings, the couple introduces themselves to the bees before a bright cloth is tied to the hive and a piece of cake is left behind. Now, beekeepers have done this for centuries because if they don't keep the bees up to date, well, they just might stop making honey. When someone dies in the house, the beekeeper will gently knock on the hive, according to tradition. Then they'll whisper the dead person's name inside. Some even place a black cloth. They made the caterpillars smell the chemical. Then tiny electric shocks shot through its body, which taught it to avoid that smell. And when the caterpillar was ready to transform, it dug into the earth and shed its skin one final time. Next, its own cells began breaking it down from the inside. Its muscles and organs were recycled, turning its tissues into a nutrient fluid. And when the transformation was finally complete, they tested it again with that same smell. And immediately, it turned away, meaning the moth still remembered its life as a caterpillar. They made the caterpillars smell the chemical. She handed him a 1-pound weight, and he laughed. He had lifted much heavier weights before, so he grabbed it and held it out in front of him with ease. But then the teacher told him to keep holding it. A few minutes passed, and his arm started to tighten. After half an hour, it began to ache. Then the pain grew sharp. By the end of the period, his arm was shaking. He could barely keep it up. Now, the weight never changed. It was still just 1 pound, but the longer he carried it, the heavier it felt. And that's when the teacher explained. Thinking about a problem for a moment is manageable, but if you carry that stress all day, it'll drain you. Carry it for years, and it can break you. Not because the problem got bigger, but because you got weaker from never setting it down. She handed him a 1-pound weight, and the toddler wandered away from his home, and search teams combed the desert for him. Nearly 7 miles away, the boy walked until dark and curled up under a tree, all alone. But a ranch dog was patrolling for coyotes nearby when he found the boy. And instead of returning home, the dog stayed beside him all night, guarding him from coyotes until morning. Then the dog led the boy to the ranch, and the boy was finally reunited with his family. When the trigger was pulled, a wheel would spin to create sparks, igniting gunpowder inside and sending a bullet flying out of the barrel and toward the enemy. And if the shooter missed and the other soldier charged, he could just swing the axe at short range, fighting off the enemy soldier. But since the axe head was big and heavy, it was hard to aim the gun, and the gun's body made it hard to hold the axe, meaning it would have been more useful as 2 separate weapons. When the trigger was pulled, a wheel would spin to create. He placed hot milk into the freezer next to another cup of milk that was at room temperature.